Welcome to the Xgrid Talks. In today's episodes, we are thrilled to welcome Kristen Bakalar as our guest. Kristen is a keynote speaker, talent developer, advocate, published author, and a board member at Disrupt HR Boston, ChangeEngine, and Storyboard Co. She's passionate about building a company culture that facilitates rapid growth. With her unique skills of being able to see the world through others' eyes, Kristen has helped leaders and organizations build gaps, build relationships, and drive business results through people. Kristen has also worked with various companies to create a culture of diversity and innovation. So, join us to talk about the importance of establishing company culture that facilitates rapid growth. So, Kristen, welcome to the show.
Hi there. How you doing? Great. Well, lovely to meet you. I'm excited to talk shop.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, I know that you're a board member at Disrupt HR Boston, Change Engine, sorry, board. So, and obviously, you've been working with, you've been in this HR position where you're helping companies with rapid growth and all. Can you please tell more about that so as to I can also understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started my own business about 18 months ago, and it's focused on what I call the fun parts of HR, which is all about creating, establishing, operationalizing company culture, spearheading some diversity and inclusion efforts, and really helping leaders be more effective. So I could say that if you need benefits or compensation, I'm not your gal. But the other stuff, the really how we impact the business, how we think about creating cultures that can facilitate the strategy that we want, that's kind of my jam.
So today we're going to talk about establishing the company culture that facilitates rapid growth. Okay. So why is having a well-defined company culture important for growth, and how can leaders establish one?
You know, there's an old adage called that says culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the intention of that is that no matter how well your strategy is defined, no matter how talented the people are, if you have a culture that undermines that, the culture will win, right? And so I'm seeing this across the board. So having a defined culture means knowing what we stand for, what we stand against, knowing what behaviors we can accept, what behaviors we're going to reward and encourage. It means making sure that the way that we behave in the organization actually supports and facilitates and empowers people to live out the strategy. So I think it's really important not just to define it. So a lot of companies start with values. Great. It's a good start. But then there's so much more after that. So the values are great. Let's be honest or, do the right thing. I see a lot of these, values. What does that mean? How do you operationalize it? How do you put that down into behaviors? So what does that look like at this company? And then we'll list some behaviors. And how does that actually impact the way we recruit and the way we promote and the way that we make decisions? Like that's the operationalization, if that's even a word, that I think we're looking for. And that's how you really not only define it, but live the culture. And how do leaders establish one? I mean, the reality is that in a small company, in a startup particularly, the founder is king or queen. And they have an outside, and then the next level down of leaders have an outsized impact on culture, right? So you can establish it by defining it. You can establish it by living it. You can establish by having very clear boundaries of saying, we don't do that here, or we do this here, right? Whatever this and that are in those sentences. So really not only talking about it, but living it, communicating it, modeling the culture that you want, I think is imperative for leaders.
Okay, so obviously business goals are tangible goals. So those are like hard numbers that you have to achieve. And then there's the culture thing. So how do you sort of like align those, and how do you measure the effectiveness of, okay, really the culture is driving that particular business goal?
So I would say a few things. One is if you're a company that has very hard metrics, here are your goals, here are the OKRs, here are the numbers, that is part of your culture, right? We are a results-driven culture. We are a data-driven culture. We are like results matter. The impact that you're having matters, right? So I think that's part of it. And the other part is If you can define your culture and operationalize it, you can then measure it, right? So as an example, if we take the value, I hate this value, but do the right thing. It's just top of mind, but it's kind of stupid. And then we operationalize it into behaviors. We can then measure those behaviors by doing surveys, right, around the organization. Did my boss do X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z is part of the value that we've identified? And if we get enough data that says, no, my boss didn't, then we can target that leader with coaching or with training or with, up to and including firing if we have to, right? Because the culture is so important. So it's defining it first, and you can, once you define it, once you operationalize it, once you really get into the details and the weeds, quite frankly, of what it looks like to live this culture, you can then measure it very simply by doing employee surveys, by observation, even self-assessments in some cases.
So obviously, it seems like there's a culture definition which is maybe done by the founders for small companies or for the startups. Okay, and that sort of like goes deeper within the company or organization. But how can the employees' feedback and their input be assimilated into a company culture?
So it's an interesting question, right? It depends. If you're talking about a company that's 3 people, that's different than a company that's 53 people, right? Which is different than a company that's 530 people. So it does change with size, as does everything. And when I think about the role of employees, I think a few things. Number one, employees really have to take on and own the culture, which means we have to do a really good job of defining it up front. And we can then hold people accountable to live the culture. So that's a piece of it. I also think that when you're in the process of trying to define it and operationalize it, if you're already up and running, the employees are your best resource because they're living it every day. Whether you've defined it or not, there is a culture, right? Whether we actually have values on the wall and behaviors and everything else, it doesn't matter. There is a culture. That is by definition of what culture is. It exists, right? It's what I'm advocating for is that we are deliberate about it so that we don't kind of get kicked in the pants later down the road. So if we haven't defined it, we have it. Let's go talk to the employees and ask them what it is. I actually worked with a company not too long ago where that was exactly what we did. We went out to all the employees, we surveyed them, we interviewed them, we had focus groups. We came back with a culture definition that not only was accurate because they told us, but they were super bought into the process and bought into the culture even more because they contributed to the definition. So using your employees not only gives you the best data, but it also has this sort of circular effect where it actually creates more buy-in, more excitement, more engagement with your employees, which is what you want for them to stay and contribute and, drive results.
So consider a situation where you're stepping into a company where the culture has gone wrong, and which means that there's a lot of status quo and all of that is there, and you need to like totally change the environment, the values, behaviors, and everything. So how would you go about it? Is it like more of a consultative process, or is it like a very surgical process? What would your approach be?
So changing a culture is hard because we have, behaviors that we're accustomed to. No doubt about it. And the bigger the company, the harder it is to change it just because of, the most people and the most history and bureaucracy and everything else. That said, I think the best way to change a culture is to, again, start with the employees. Because I can almost guarantee that if you at the top think that something's not right, your employees probably knew it before you, right? The people closest to the work have the information we need. So I think leveraging them and including them in the process. So I would start with some sort of town hall of some all hands, something like that, to say, here's what I'm sensing. I really want to hear from you. I want to know what you're experiencing. How can we together make this company even more effective, right? And inviting them into the process. Then I might survey them. I might do focus groups. I might do interviews just to really understand them and have the employees be the driving force of the culture change. Now, where this gets tricky is that leaders are the models. And so if an employee sees a leader behaving in a way that's antithetical to the culture, whether it's the culture we're defining for the future or the culture we've defined for the past or for the present, then that undermines everything we're doing. So while it's really important to have the employees be part of the process and even start and spur the process, the leaders are the ones that really have to sort of initiate and put a stake in the ground about what's acceptable and what's not, and then live it, right, and be accountable to it. So, as an example, if we want to create a culture of feedback, great, lots of companies want to do that. How do we do that? First, I would talk to the employees about what that means, what that looks like, why it would matter to them, are they on board, etc. And then once it was all established, the power of the leaders publicly getting feedback, accepting feedback, inviting feedback, asking for feedback becomes even more important, because we're now like solidifying that cultural norm, trying to make it, the way of the future.
Let's just talk technology and data. So how can company culture be facilitated by using technology and data, and what kind of metrics should we track or you're used?
So I think it depends on the technology, but there's a lot of companies obviously that use Slack as a communication tool, and there's so many metrics there. You can do an organizational network analysis. You can look at who's talking to who, what's the length of the messages, what sort of groups are there. You can look at what sorts of channels get the most action. So I think there's a lot of data in how people are communicating there. I think technology enabled feedback or employee sentiment surveys, that sort of thing is super powerful. Again, I'm a big advocate for that the employee knows before the leader what's going on, right? There's some really interesting science and data around retail. And if you ask your frontline employees how things are going, their responses will mirror that of your customers. So higher employee satisfaction and engagement and excitement on the front lines will equate to higher customer satisfaction, because they're the ones closest to the customer. So I think really leveraging that from a technological standpoint is really important. And then I think, depending on what technology you're using, right? Like there's data. I mean, we're inundated with data. So using that to really understand what's driving what. And I'll admit there is a subjective part to all of this, right? So employee engagement surveys, sentiments, those sorts of things, they're not 100% objective, obviously, because we are humans at work trying to live in an objective world. We don't. So I actually think that collecting data from employees is vital, and it's not going to give you a black and white picture. It's going to give you a gray picture that you can then dig into, which is just part of being a human, I think.
So in terms of consider any company that is rapidly growing. So obviously you're building a process, but as you grow, you're breaking those processes, you're building new ones, and then you're building new processes, you're breaking those and building new ones. So how does company culture stay intact in such situations, and how do you sort of what do you recommend to handle such situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, right? In this rapid growth, in the startup mode, we're trying and we're changing and we're iterating constantly, which is great. I would say that becomes part of the culture, that we are a culture of experimentation, we're a culture of iteration. Things can change. The culture would facilitate a culture, a company being agile and flexible, right? So I would say, be careful about who you promote. Right? Oftentimes we're moving so fast that we just promote the best salesperson, and then they're not the best sales leader, or we promote the person who does engineering the best, but they're not the best engineering leader. So I think that's a really, I would say that's a red flag around when you're growing really rapidly. Just be careful and be thoughtful about who you're promoting. Promote a leader, not a high performer. I think that's one piece. And I think that there's no reason that your culture has to change so drastically if your company is rapidly growing. Culture is really about how we talk to each other, how we make decisions. What are we talking about how do we talk about you when you're not in the room? Those sorts of things, right? This isn't about, do we need more ping pong tables or beer kegs, right? Culture is not about that. It's about, how do I grow my career? Can I be myself? Can I get really good work done? Am I rewarded for that good work? Are we kind? Are we mean? Is it cutthroat? Like, those are all elements of the culture that I think we should be thinking about. So in a really fast growing company where we don't have time to think about culture, there still is the culture, right? It's still about, can you be moving quickly and be kind? If you are, then you probably have a culture that is kind. Can you be moving really quickly and still stop to give people feedback? If you can, then you probably have a culture that values feedback, right? So culture actually enables the strategy and enables the work to get done, not the other way around.
Okay, so you all, I would assume that you will be talking to a lot of employees in different companies about cultures and all of that. So what motivates employees to join a particular company, or what kind of cultural traits that they're looking from the outside as to, okay, this company is cool and this company is not?
There's a ton of recruiting advertisements that talk about the ping pong tables and the bring your dog and the beer kegs and the parties, which is very attractive. That is something sexy about that for a lot of potential employees, but that is not your culture. If you have a bring your dog to work culture, that's great. I love dogs. What it actually is saying is that we value a little bit of authenticity, or maybe we value work-life balance, that you don't have to, put your dog in doggy daycare. You can bring them with you. Maybe we value taking breaks, because dogs need more walks than we do. So you take your dog out, right? Like, those are the things underneath what you can see about bringing your dog to work. So, I think that as we're talking about culture and building culture, it's really important to be clear on what culture is and what it isn't. And so what people really want from a company is they want to know that they can be themselves, that they can show up authentically, that they can grow their career, that they're doing meaningful work, that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, that they're a part of something bigger than themselves. They want to respect the leadership. They want to, a lot of people like, Gen Z, millennials, like, they really care about some of the social aspects to work, right? How does social justice fit in, and what does this company stand for? So I think all of those things are actually way more interesting and enticing to talk about in the interview process than the beer kegs. As much as I love a beer keg, that's not going to help me grow my career. That's not going to make sure that I'm contributing and doing meaningful work.
And consider with the recession that, I mean, is there as looming around, or with the layoffs and everything. Okay, so obviously many employees at times might be let go. And after those episodes, how do you go back as a leader and talk about the culture, and how do you handle those situations?
So hard. Let me go backwards a little bit. Before you get to layoffs, my hope is that the leader has exhausted every other possibility. There's enough research that shows that layoffs aren't actually having the benefit that we think they are. There's a lot of people that leave after layoffs, so we lose more people. It takes a long time to recover from that from a cultural standpoint. So my hope is that layoffs are the absolute last choice, after pay cuts, after forced vacations, after getting rid of other tangible things, after assessing technological needs, etc. That's my hope. All that said, sometimes layoffs happen, and I think the best leaders do them in a really humane way. What I mean by that is, what you often see, and I'll use Google as the latest example from a couple months ago, right? People got up in the middle of the night, or they sent an email in the middle of the night. People got up in the morning to log on and they couldn't log on. And they're like, oh, I guess I'm fired, right? That's a horrible way to go after 10, 12, 15 years of service. It feels so horrible. And I would highly suggest not to do that, right? This humane way of doing it is taking care of people, is being honest and authentic about it. It's making those choices really thoughtfully. And the aftermath of that, right? So now people have left on a Tuesday. On the Wednesday, how do we bring the quote unquote survivors back into, an engaged way? And my answer is slowly. Very often, leaders will come back the day after the layoff and go, oh, that was a really hard day for XYZ company. but the future is bright and off we go. And it's sort of devoid from meaning and humanity, right? Like people don't bounce back that quickly. So I actually think it's really important for leaders to acknowledge what they've done maybe wrong in the planning, how we got to this place, how we're going to not get to this place again, how are we going to change things, and how each employee can contribute. If it were me, I would actually give them the afternoon off because I know that that's going to pay off later. Sure, taking a hit in your productivity the day after the layoff is hard, but you're going to take a hit on that productivity the day after the layoff no matter what, because employees just don't bounce back that fast. They're going to be talking. They're going to be worried. They're worried about their own jobs. Are there more? All of these questions are looming from a cultural perspective. So I think the day and the days after the layoff, it's really important to be super empathetic, give people some time and space, and let them know how you took care of the people that departed, right? How did we take care of the people that were employees up until yesterday or up until today? I think that sends a really strong message around your culture. If it was, everybody got 1 week severance and we're done, that actually says something about your culture, which some people can't afford it. That's fine. But that is a cultural element, right? Versus we hooked them up with a career coach. We've opened the Slack channel so that they can continue to communicate. I am writing every person a letter of recommendation on LinkedIn. Like that says about your culture that you really care about your people, which will inspire higher levels of engagement from the people that are left.
Obviously, and before obviously all of this, there was this virus, novel virus, and hit everything, and people started working from homes, and quite a few companies are shifted to like a remote first situation right now. In such situations, like a company which has just shifted to a remote first, and how do they establish this culture? And obviously they're growing faster, and this is also happening. So what are the best practices over there?
Yeah, so great question. And obviously a lot of companies are working through this right now. Again, culture is not the ping pong tables in the office, right? Culture is how we make decisions. How do we talk to each other? How do we measure performance? How do we promote people? How do we have conversations like that, right? So if we think about culture in those terms, being remote doesn't really affect that. It might make it a little bit more challenging, right? It might mean we have to be more intentional, more deliberate about getting the right people in the virtual room, but it doesn't change the fundamental premise of making a decision, right? So I think what's happening in a remote first world is people are getting a little bit more siloed because we're not running into each other at the water cooler or at the ping pong table or whatever, which is a problem. But we can solve that by bringing people together more intentionally, inviting them to different levels of meetings. We're going to make a decision on this. I want to hear from everybody. Here's a quick Slack poll that, everybody can be engaged in. And now their voice is being considered in this decision. So I actually think that it's problematic to say that in a remote first culture, a remote first company, we can't build culture, because that's the wrong definition of what culture is. I think it might be that we have to be more intentional about reaching out, inviting, creating systems, and using technology to enable these things. But the culture still exists, right? How are we measuring performance? How are we knowing if you're being productive? Are we micromanaging? We want everyone to be on a Google Meet all day so I can see what you're doing? Or are we saying, look, these are the deliverables. I hope you get them done by 5. I don't care when you work. Like that is the culture, right? This remote first. Are we flexible? Are we micromanaging? Are we breathing down people's necks? Are we giving them the freedom? Like all of those things is how we get the work done. And how we get the work done really comes down to culture.
Okay, so obviously you talked about employee empowerment, and so how do you collect that particular feedback from those employees uh, for on establishing a culture, or maybe giving their input on what needs to be done and what not?
When I'm thinking about sort of defining culture and using employees' feedback for that, I will start with a survey, whether that's the free ones of Google or Microsoft, or a more advanced version. I don't know that I have a preference, but I'll start with a survey. Then I'll do some focus groups, and then I might have senior leaders identify some really key players, or use like an organizational network analysis to really see like who are the hubs in the organization, who are the real influencers in this organization, and then might talk to them separately, and interview them and really get a feel for what's working there. I think that there's a plethora of technology that you could use, whether that's survey data or sort of O&A type stuff to help this. And then you can kind of collect that data. Again, the more advanced tools are going to give you more advanced and interesting data, but you can still get a sentiment for free using whatever survey tools available.
So obviously, in terms of rapid growth, you're hiring employees and their targets and everything. But how do you keep company culture which is inclusive and diverse, considering such kind of pace that you need to grow?
Yeah, there's this concept of, I'm sure all the listeners have heard of financial debt, right? I don't have enough money for this, so I'm going to take out a loan. I take out a $10,000 loan, and I know that over the next 5 years, I'm going to wind up paying back $11,000 with interest. So I have a fixed term and I have a fixed amount. And then there's tech debt, right? Where I go like, gosh, I don't have time to fix this issue. I can just put a little Band-Aid over it, but I'll get back to it later. And there's a little more risk there. I don't know exactly what the timeline is, but I can probably estimate the timeline and I can estimate the impact. With culture debt, it's an unknown timeline and an unknown interest level. And I would say it's compounding interest. And what I mean by that is when a cultural issue goes unfixed, or if we don't pay attention to something, it's going to bite us later. And the problem 6 months from now or 6 years from now is absolutely going to be bigger than the problem today. So I would be really thoughtful about that piece of it and what sort of shortcuts can we take to get work done and what should we never jeopardize because we know it's going to hurt us later. So I would think about, and there's this other sort of adage, right? Like go slow to go fast. I don't know if you've heard about that, but the idea is that if we take our time up front and really establish ourselves and establish a plan and get on the same page and make sure that people are communicating, it enables us to go really quickly later. If we just start going fast, we are going to come to a point where we've screwed something up and we've got to now slow down to fix it. So either way, we're spending time, and I would advocate to spend time up front. When it comes to DEI at rapidly growing, companies, and how do we, continue to foster that inclusive environment, again, I do think it's about how we make decisions, how we bring people into the fold. Are all voices heard, or are we going, you know what, it's faster to just talk to Kristen and let's just get this done, right? That's not inclusive. It's faster. It's not inclusive. We say, you know what, I know this is going to take a little bit more time, but see if you can get Kristen and these other 5 people in a room real quick, huddle for 10 minutes and make the decision. That's inclusive. It's not that much slower. So I think really being thoughtful about that. And again, I know that sometimes in startup mode, we hire our friend or we hire the person we know or the person we worked with at the last company, and we just start to go because we're, high pressure, high stakes, got to get things out the door. I can appreciate that. I'm not trying to change that and make every company go incredibly slow. The idea is to facilitate rapid growth. What I'm advocating for is take a little bit more time up front so you can take less time on the back end.
So, in terms of then agility and in terms of flexibility of obviously things change a lot in business world. So it's like a 6 months back, the company was very different. Now 6 months forward, the company is very different now. And with that, company culture has to change at times. So is it recommended to be that agile once you're growing that rapidly, or is it like no, company culture should be like fixated for this particular period of time and should stay like this?
I think it's the company culture that enables the agility, right? So when I think about that, I go, what are the levels of bureaucracy? What are the levels of approval, right? That's what enables us to be agile. We're going down this road. We made a decision. We've got to pivot. How many people do we need to get approval from to pivot? Is it 1? Is it 5? Is it none? Like that in and of itself is your culture, right? Do we trust our employees to make those decisions? Go. We're agile. We can change because the employee knows that they can do that as long as we know that there's a North Star. Do we have that North Star? Do we know where we're actually headed? What's our vision? Like that comes down to culture, right? Like, do we have a culture where we are mission focused or purpose driven or have this North Star? Like, I think it's it's not right to say that culture is another thing. Like, culture is underneath the business propelling it forward. Culture is the propeller on the bottom of the boat, right? The strategy is your boat, right? Like, so it's what's pushing us forward. You know what I mean? Like, it's so obvious and easy when someone doesn't have a skill set to do the job. When you haven't hit your sales numbers, or you haven't coded in the right, like, that's easy, right? It's the underneath, it's the cultural stuff that's actually driving that. We have the talent. It's the culture that's actually enabling the talent to come together in the right way to produce those business results. If we have a weak link, we know this person isn't performing, that's an easy problem to solve, right? We either train them or get rid of them. I'm being a little crass, but in theory, if we have someone who's underperforming, we know what to do. When we have a company that's not totally achieving results, we have to look at the systemic culture to understand what's underneath this, right? So that's the piece that I'm really interested in.
So, share with us some of the examples where you've seen that a very good, well-functioning culture has driven rapid growth also. So, if you can just maybe talk about those, some of the examples that will help us.
Yeah. I will absolutely. I have a couple of examples. And I think, as a caveat, it's important to say that we on the outside don't know everything about what happens on the inside, right? So there's always some skeletons in the closet. One of the companies that comes to mind is this hedge fund called Bridgewater. They have a very specific culture around feedback. They record every single meeting. They give extremely direct, extremely candid feedback. And that type of culture is not for everyone. That has facilitated, I think they're one of the most successful hedge funds in the world. And they grew really fast and really successfully. That culture is not for everyone, but it's clear. It's defined. Everybody knows what it is before they're joining. So they're, I don't think I want to work there because that's a little cutthroat for me, but that's perfect for a lot of people, right? And it's established, and the leaders model it beautifully. I think about Zappos, the shoe company. They had a culture. They had this process in recruiting where they would, when they wanted to hire someone, they would offer them $1,000 to not take the job. And what that signaled was, if that person took the $1,000, then woof, good. It only cost us $1,000 to get rid of that. If we had hired them and they quit 6 months down the road, or 9 months, or 2 years, it would have cost us way more. And if that person values $1,000 in hand versus what they could make and what they can contribute, that's not the right person. So Zappos is a great example to me around how to embed your culture into your hiring process. That they value the long commitment. They value people who want to contribute and want to step in and want to be part of it. They also, as part of their recruiting process, would interview anybody that talked to the person along the way. So a welcome staff, a janitor, a driver. How did that person treat you? And even if they were the best, most qualified candidate, if they treated the driver or the janitor poorly, they didn't get hired. That, to me, signals culture and values. I think about Google, right? Like, Google is giant and huge, and their culture has shifted 1,000 times. But if you think about from the very early days, they had this culture of innovation. They had this culture that, what was it, 20% of your time can be spent on doing whatever you want. There's games and toys in their offices so that they facilitate play, knowing that play actually facilitates innovation, and they wanted to be this innovative company. So I think about Google in that way. I'm working with an ad agency right now. I'd prefer not to say the name, but they're small. They're maybe 150 employees, and they have this value to take care of each other. And I would say that in and of itself is actually facilitating their growth. They are so kind to each other. They look out for each other. They're advocating for each other. They're protecting each other. And what that's creating is this familial type environment where people really want to do a good job, because I can't bear to let down my colleague. So it's spurring productivity. It's spurring quality. It's spurring effectiveness because of this really communal kind of approach to their culture. So those are a few examples that come to mind.
Okay, so in these examples, how would they go about doing this? So is it like, so there's a value, purpose, mission statements, and it's talked about in all hands, or there's some cadence? what do you see is at play? Like, how is that actually communicated again and again within the companies?
So I think it's not only that the values and mission and vision are communicated, but that they're lived and embedded into how we do things. So let's go back to Zappos. I can't claim to know all their values or all the nuances of their culture, but if they're doing this practice in recruiting, if they're paying people $1,000 to not take the job, if they're interviewing all the people they talk about, you can get clear on what they care about, right? This company is a company that cares about being kind and being thoughtful, considerate, that you're not better than anybody else just because you make more money or you're in a higher position. So those are some of their cultural elements, and they've embedded them into the process. So I think that is actually the key. When the processes, and I'm talking about recruiting processes, promotion processes, decision-making processes, like any process that you have to do things, to make a decision, to get work shipped, to talk to customers, to get customer feedback, like all of those processes, if we can make sure that our cultural values are embedded into those, that will make sure that we are living the culture. So yeah, it's great to talk about values if you're the CEO or the leader or whatever. Super important. Keep doing that. And it's about making it part of how we get work done. So values is step one, and then we've got to go deeper into living the values. So what are the behaviors associated with those values? What does it look like? What does good look like? What does bad look like? What do we do when we find someone who's not behaving in a way that's aligned with our values, right? All of those things is what I'm talking about when I talk about culture.
In terms of somebody who wants to learn, who wants to sort of dig deeper into such topics, and who's sort of like maybe exploring how to work on this kind of topic, which resources would you recommend?
Oh, well, I'm an avid Harvard Business Review reader. I think there's a lot of stuff about culture in there. I follow some thought leaders like Brene Brown and Adam Grant and Simon Sinek. Gallup is a company that does a ton with culture, and so I subscribe to some of their stuff. I think some of their things are interesting. There's a company called Nobel, Nobl, and I think they are doing some really cool things around change within a culture and probably targeting smaller companies. And then there's something called the First Round Review, which is also for the sort of startup or small company, that sort of market, that I think they do some, it's not all the time, but they do some interesting things around culture. They also do things around product market fit and other things, but I think there's a cultural element that's included in there. Those are some of the things that I follow. There's several books. There's books about like Netflix. There's books about Google. There's books about Zappos probably. So there's things to learn in there as well.
Okay, that's good. So, Kristen, thanks a lot. That was an amazing discussion. So where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn at Kristen Bakalar, and you can find me on my website, kristenbakalar.com. I'll spell it. It's KristenBakalar.com. And that's my name on LinkedIn as well.
Okay. So again, it was an amazing session. To be honest, there are quite a few questions I wanted to ask, and you've been really kind enough to answer all of those. So it was really nice talking to you.
You too. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So have an amazing day. Thanks a lot for your time. Truly appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.